that had happened. And there was a lot of stuff that I learned, and I was really emotionally impacted by the experiences that I had too. So the journal was a way for me of processing some of that emotion that came up too.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that you mentioned, you know, the refugee transit sort of into Europe while you were there.
Yeah.
From those stories, what really struck you about that refugee migration that you said, okay, I have to capture this in some shape, form, or fashion. This story kind of needs to be, it needs to live somewhere else as well.
Yeah, that was the most difficult part to write about.
Yeah.
And I actually couldn't even journal about it until about a year after I got back, because the experience was so vivid and so painful. It was just really scary. Like, I was in Hungary during the migrant crisis that happened. And I don't speak Hungarian, so I couldn't understand the news that was all around me. And I couldn't communicate with very many of my neighbors or anything. All I saw was thousands of people in desperate need, and they weren't getting any help from anyone. And I started talking to some of the refugees, because I would go to the train station every day where many people were camping. I mean, they were camping. They were just sleeping on the ground, and no one gave them anything to sleep on. And they were telling me stuff about what they'd experienced since coming to Europe, and the kind of like terrible treatment that they were getting. And it was just so awful. And there's also just there's a lot of history in Hungary, which is just under the surface of their own traumatic history in terms of the Holocaust recently. And then also, you know, they tried to have a revolution in Hungary in 1956 to get rid of the Soviet army, and that turned into, you know, a whole bunch of political executions and things like that. So they have a very fraught history, which is very emotional. And then all of these refugees coming in there and asking for help and then being rejected so hard was very difficult for me to see. Yeah. I felt like it was really important for me to get that out there, but it was really difficult, and I didn't even touch that subject. I couldn't emotionally deal with it until I'd already been working on the book for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that I can definitely understand that. And speaking of your work on the book, did you begin your pitching process to publishers while you were still in Europe, or was it after you came back that you started to take these experiences and, you know, kind of refine them and consolidate them? What was that process like? Leading up to it?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to make a book out of it pretty early on. But I didn't pitch the idea, because I'm a perfectionist, until I had like 30 pages of like perfect drawing. And I was like, yeah, now I can go and talk to them about it. Because it's my first book, so I feel like I really wanted to impress them. I like really, really wanted to make an impression. So I waited until I'd kind of felt like I'd, you know, gotten my style down, and I had like a consistency to my look, and I had like one full vignette. I'm going to borrow your term because that really works. One full vignette that I could show and be like, I have literally like 40 more of these stories that I could do. I just need the support. And then the first publisher that I approached offered to publish the book. So there.
that is so awesome.
Thank you.
And yeah, that definitely deserves a hand clap. Thank you, Marlon. Yeah, because that's so phenomenal of a process too, where so you find your match, you find your one-to-one sort of on the first go around, which I think is just phenomenal, and such a powerful story within and of itself, because, you know, I feel like so many narratives that are out there say that it always has to be one way. You always have to have, you know, 500 rejections, and it's always going to take, you know, 3 years. But the experience is really varied. Sometimes that is the case, but sometimes the opposite end of the spectrum is just as true. And so you really have to go into it understanding that your process, your journey is going to be your own. And everybody else's journey, you can use them as maybe reference points to help frame your understanding of what's happening. But you can't use them as, okay, this happened to this person and they're a great artist, so I know I'm going to at least have to do, you know, X amount as much. And thank you guys, everybody who's dropping questions into the chat, because yes, we will have the Q&A session in about 15 minutes where, you know, we're going to go in order of where the questions are dropped into chat. So if anything comes up as we're talking, please go ahead and drop it into the chat, and then we'll get a chance to ask Veronica in a little bit. Nice. And so pitching to your publisher, let's dive into that a little bit more, because I know you and I have talked about it, but you know, I definitely want to make sure we cover it here while we're all together. Did you literally just walk in with a stack of journal sketches, or did you,
No.
what was that process?
I mean, like you said, it's a very individual thing, and the experience could be different for anyone depending on who you go to and who you talk to and at what time. So Conundrum Press is a very small, relatively speaking, publishing house, although in Canada, they're one of the bigger ones. They happen to be located in my province, in a small town where my godparents also live. And so of course it's a tiny town in Nova Scotia. Everyone knows everyone else. And I was like, oh, there's a publisher here and they're really good. And I just went and I made a call basically. And I talked Andy, who's the brains behind the operation. He's the publisher, the editor. He specifically doesn't take submissions. Like, he states it on the website and kind of personally. He's like, don't submit anything to me. And I don't see it. He's kind of grumpy. But, you know, it was like, I guess I just got him on the right day, or it was just good timing. And he said, oh, okay, well, yeah, you know, my godfather is an artist as well in the community. So they knew each other as peers in the same kind of world of arts. He said, well, okay, I know your godfather and he's a really good artist and he vouches for you. And so because he did that, you know, like me, I'll see. I'll take a look, you know, he was so cranky. But so I was really lucky. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a matter of, and this is something that I actually have a big issue with. It's nepotism, right? Like a lot of things that happen in any kind of world that you're revolving in, any kind of business. If you know someone who knows someone, you know, you can often find these ways, these like channels to get in. So I was really privileged in that respect. But if I had been, you know, denied speaking to Andy, I would have tried another publisher. But I wanted to find a publisher who did publish the kind of story that I wanted to do, which was really like, you know, independent graphic novel, autobiography type of thing. And he was one of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, I was really lucky. I was really privileged to have the opportunity to meet with him, but also I do the type of work that he likes. And I do the type of book that he wants to publish. So I also had that going for me.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. When choosing your house, you definitely want to look at what they've put out. We talk about this all the time, what they've already put out before, and is that in alignment with what you're hoping to sell in, because their track record of what they've published is telling you what they're making bets on. It's literally telling you what they've been buying from artists. And you know, that's pretty much the best marker of what vein they like to be in, what types of stories they like to tell, and in what style. But yeah, to that point, so what was the process like after you know you guys had agreed? How long did it take to get the contract nailed down? What was your turnaround time? So boom, you got a contract. When do you owe them a book? What was your compensation, if you're comfortable sharing, in terms of like royalties and trade-offs like that, just so everybody can get an idea of like how different, you know, publishers operate differently. Walk us through some of the points on the business end.
Yeah, okay. So I signed the contract. You know, it did kind of like a handshake type of deal. And then he gave me a contract probably about 3 months after our first meeting, but we'd already gotten into the process of applying for some funding together. So he, like, here in Canada, there's a lot of arts funding available through the Canada Council for the Arts, which is like a national body, and also provincially. There's arts institutions. There's like one provincial art institution that gives out money. So because I had his backing, I was able to secure some grant money, and he was able to get some commission grant money that he gave me. And in the contract basically states that I will get, I'd have to double check, but I think it's 20% of the royalties of the sale of the book.
Nice.
After 5 years, the copy, like all of the rights to the book can come back to me. If he wants to republish it, we can renegotiate the contract, type of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And congrats on that, because as we talk about, 20% is really high. If any of you have joined us for any of the earlier sessions where different artists, illustrators, where we're talking about their royalty percentages. When Jennifer Potter joined us, even though her commission fee is so much higher now, I think, as an illustrator of children's books, she's charging anywhere between 12 and 16,000 a book, but her royalty percentage is 5% on royalty sales, right? And so there's that sort of trade-off of, okay, we'll pay you more up front, but if this book goes on to be, a national, international bestseller, your take home is going to be 5 cents on a dollar. And so, these are all things to think about in terms of your deal and your structure. If you guys do want to go traditional publishing, it's something you want to think about. You really want to think about that sort of that balance and what makes sense for you. And just like Veronica just mentioned, publishers are all in different circumstances at different times. Sometimes when you approach them, they want to take you on, but they've made all of the bets that they can make for that foreseeable quarter or stretch. Basically, they've spent all of their money and they've already bought all the books they can afford to buy from artists. And so you catch them at a time where they want to take you on, but they have to get really creative about, okay, how do we secure what it is we're taking on? And also, Veronica, when they picked up, I saw that Conundrum picked up the World English rights. So you retain your illustrator and text copyright?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay,
yeah.
Great, great.
Yeah, also, something else just came to mind when you were talking about all of that. Can't remember now. Something about funding. I could have applied for a lot of funding on my own independently, which I should say, I wish I'd structured that into my schedule a little bit more. There's a couple of things I wish I had done in hindsight. So one of them is really just worked on one really good application for money for this book, and then just resubmitted it every 6 months whenever they have their call out, and just kept on trying, because I could have gotten a little bit of money just on my own. I could have been seeking that out. But I didn't do it because I was so busy, and I was, I'll just get this book done and then I'll worry about that. I can do that later. Wish I'd done that. Second thing is, I wish I'd also, this is a total side point, but I wish I booked or budgeted a little bit of money for more self-care stuff, because I actually got such severe neck and back pain from sitting for so many hours a day drawing. So it would have been awesome if I had budgeted in some money for massage therapy.
Yeah, no, those are the little things you don't think about, right? To keep the train on track and keep a well-oiled machine, you kind of need some of these things. And you may have mentioned it, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but end to end, how much time did you have to produce the book? Once your contract was signed, how much time did you have?
So Andy was really generous, and he's pretty hands-off unless you specifically ask him for help with something. He pretty much is hands-off. But I thought I was going to finish this book in a year and a half. About 9 months into the process, I realized that I was not going to give myself enough time, because I was also I'm also self-employed. I have another business on the side. So I ended up giving myself 3 years to do it, which I thought was going to be more than I needed. But I ended up using every last second of those 3 years. So yeah, I was glad that I gave myself more time than I thought I needed, because I really used it all. And so many creative breakthroughs happened during the process. So I was like, whoa, now I'm reimagining this thing, and now maybe I need to change some things. And you know, I had the time to really play around with that, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Wow. That's amazing. Just the scope of time, because it really is such an incredible and comprehensive work. I don't know if everybody had a chance to see the book. We'll definitely be sharing it with you guys in the link about where you guys can get it from Conundrum. I ordered it directly from Conundrum, and it came in like, 4 or 5 days out of Canada. So
Oh, great.
it was really smooth. And you were right, Andy did drop in another book into my package,
You
so I
did?
got like a
Oh,
preview. So you called
amazing.
it. You called it. Nice.
Ah, that's good.
So let's talk a little bit about creative process too, because I know we have some author illustrators who join us and who are here today. What is your creative process? When do you typically like to work? What things help you get into the mode? How do you like to structure your time? How do you take ideas and turn them into panels and vignettes? Like what's that input output?
Yeah, I think, I've learned a lot about my process during the making of this book, which is great because I think to sit down at the beginning of a project and make a schedule for yourself based on what you know works for you. I'm a morning person, so the best part of the day for me to do creative, energetic output is probably between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So I like to take a fairly leisurely breakfast. But I'm thinking about stuff, and I'm, like contemplating it. And then I'll really sit down and what I do is I have an alarm. I set an alarm for myself for 1 hour. So I need to stay at that desk working on something for 1 hour. Then I give myself a 15-minute break in which I can stretch and drink some water or some coffee, go outside for a little bit, 15 minutes, then I come back, I do another hour, and I tried to do that every day so that I had a minimum of 3 solid hours of work and hopefully between 3 and 5 hours of work at the desk. Then, so in terms of my creative process, that's it. Some days were like, obviously some days are going to be really, really good. And I'd be like, I feel like I'm working on a panel that's really inspiring, or I'm really into like how it's looking. And then I can work for a lot longer because I'm really into what I'm doing. And there's some really hard days where I feel like everything I do doesn't look good and I have to redo everything 3 or 4 times, right? And there's a lot of self-doubt, and there's a lot of, it's like you're just carrying these like heavy weights of like whatever it might be. Like for me, it was I'm a perfectionist, so I think no one's going to think it's good enough, blah blah blah. And it can be good to have part of your creative process, like, if you could visualize the weights that you're carrying and just like let them go before you even start the day. Just something to tell yourself like you're good enough and you're actually doing like great work. Had to remind myself of that constantly. That was an important part of my creative process, for real. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely believe it. Just in terms of that reinforcement and also the letting go too. We've heard that from a couple of artists as well, who even when it's done, the process of letting it go out into the world, or to your publisher, or to your agent or your editor for that outside critique, that real critique, is it can be daunting sometimes, because you are opening your work, your baby, up to adverse opinions, criticism, feedback, and so, but that is a part of the process, which is why we do like to do critique groups here with the group, so that we can kind of get that feedback in real time. Even if people just have an idea or they have like a finished product, we do go through our critique circles where we get to give thoughtful peer feedback on what we were confused on, what we thought could have been stronger, things like that, because it helps you share your work in bits and pieces. So hopefully when you go across the threshold of really sharing it with the outside world, you can have a little bit more confidence that, this isn't the first time somebody's seen my work, or gave me feedback on my work. Hopefully.
I think that's awesome. I wish that I had already set up peer network to do something similar with, because Andy was the only person who saw my work at all. I was like no one's gonna see it until it's perfect. So Andy was the only one who saw it, and he did give me really good feedback. But of course, now that once it gets out in the world, you start hearing questions from people, like they want clarification on certain points, and you're like, this isn't so bad. You know, like I don't know what I was so afraid of, you know, like it can be really helpful to get that type of feedback earlier on. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of reviews in the more formal sense, has your publisher submitted your work for any editorial reviews? And if so, how have those been for you so far?
So it was submitted for an editorial review in Atlantic Book Reviews, which is like the Nova Scotia one. And I'm pretty sure it was submitted to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So I haven't actually read any reviews yet that have been published. So CBC, they listed it as one of the 10 books to read this year or something like that in terms of their graphic novels. But I know, it was just great. And then there was another, just things keep on bouncing up. Like I think the Comics Experience, which is like a bookstore in San Francisco, you might be familiar with it. They voted it the book of the month for this month. And so they're going to interview me next week. Stuff has just been popping up, but I'm sure it was submitted. I'm sure the publicist would have submitted it to different places. What I've heard from my publisher was that it can take, several months for those reviews to start coming in because they have a backlog of books that they haven't read yet.
Yeah.
So it can take up to 6 months before you really start seeing like for real reviews coming in. And I was also pre-warned, which is what I'm keeping in mind, that, the work of a reviewer is not just to praise things.
Yeah.
It's supposed to also, point out what they don't like. So I'm prepared for that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Parts of the process. Well, I'm so glad it's going well right now.
Thank you.
Last two questions before we open it up for Q&A. How do you deal, if you encounter this at all, with creative block when you're trying to work through a project or get started on something? Is that something you experience? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Yeah, it totally is something that I experience. When I've experienced it the worst was when, oddly enough, it was when I made a really significant, when I discovered or realized that I'd made a really significant improvement in my style. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go back and redo everything that I've already done that's not this good, right?
Right.
And I was like overwhelmed by that type of thing. And then that's not the only time. Sometimes, you just don't have the energy. You just wonder why you're doing it and who's going to care and all of that stuff. What I try to do to feel better about that is to do some drawings that are like not related to the book and just remember why I like drawing in the first place. Also, looking at the work that I'm the most proud of, like I usually, as I'm going through working on my drawings, if I do one that I particularly love, I'll keep it up and I just pin it on the wall in front of my face so that that's a reminder to myself of like, that I feel good about what I'm doing and that I think I'm good at it, So those things help me. Sometimes you just need to take a day off and you just need to not do it. And that's okay too. It's like, you need to sometimes just recharge. And there was a quote that I heard, I can't remember who said it, but it had something to do with, there is times when you are really charged up and you're outputting a lot. And what you want to do is put things out there. And there's times when you just need to sit back and have something put into you. Like you need to like bring the creativity into you rather than always be putting it out. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you have to also, you can't just feed the world without eating yourself, right?
Right.
Yeah. So reading other books, like reading other novelists and graphic novelists who I think are great, that's also inspiring too. Realizing that they have been through this whole thing too, and they managed to get through it. It's not because they're innately better than me. Right?
No, exactly. Finding your process is such a big part of it, and it's such a one-to-one experience. You know, your process is going to look like your process, but figuring out what works for you, not only to start, but to overcome sort of confusions in your story or confusions in your artistic process is going to be so important to like your professional growth and trajectory, because a lot of times it is problem solving and it is finding a way what works best for you, taking a day off, you know, continuing to work, inspiring you by showing some of the work that you've already done to yourself so you know you can do it, like Veronica said. All of that's really important.
Yeah.
So yeah, upcoming projects. What do you have in the cooker, and what are your plans for if you're working on something new or some things new? Do you want to pitch those again to Conundrum, or do you want to walk them to another publisher? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I did just finish an application process for a grant for $15,000 to start a new book, which I've
Nice.
already sort of started. So
Mhm.
there's two projects that I would love to complete one day. One of them is kind of like a prequel to the original book, which explains why Langosh is in the situation he's in, because in the book he's kind of like on the run from the law.
Mm.
And so I wanted to delve deeper into that. I wanted to talk in that book a lot about sort of like the criminalization of graffiti artists. I mean, this is all kind of related to some stuff in my life. So
Mm.
I wanted to get into that. That's going to be a bit more of a long-term project probably, because it's going to require more research and some travel. But the one that I'm working on now is additional stories to Langosh and Peppi. So further travels in the Balkans and also travels throughout the US and Canada.
Mm.
So that's like, those are some other projects I'm working on, which are, you know, coming down the road.
Nice. And do you
Yeah.
have an idea of so let's say you get the grant, everything goes well. Do you have an idea of where you want to pitch that to, or what you want to do with the finished product?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm probably going to go with Conundrum again,
Yeah.
because I have a really good relationship with Andy, and it's been, I have really liked working with him.
Yeah.
If I was going to pitch it, if I was ever going to work with another publisher in the future, I think it probably would be Drawn and Quarterly,
Yeah.
because I have a lot of connections in Montreal too, and they also publish books similar in style to what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Another graphic novelist that had a chance to chat with recently was Rumi Hara, and she just got
Oh,
her book,
amazing.
yeah, published through Drawn and Quarterly. And so, yeah, I can definitely see your style and your work being a good one-to-one with their style as well. And
Yeah,
so it's good,
yeah,
good to have options. Good to have options.
absolutely.
So yeah, let's get to some of the questions that people have been asking here in the chat, because you know that's what this is all about, making sure people get their questions answered. So Eva asked, when you did those 30 pages, your initial 30, what size were they?
Okay, so they were 13.5 by 9.25 inches
Mm, mhm.
pages. Yeah.
Nice,
It just
nice.
so happened to be the size of the sketchbook that I had.
Oh, okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool. And Teresa wanted to know, how did you vet your publisher? What made you go with Conundrum?
Yeah. So I think I talked a little bit about this, but because Conundrum publishes work that's similar to my own, and because they were local, and because I had already sort of a connection in terms of we knew the same people, we were in the same circle. That was why I decided to go to them.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first book, and I felt like I had a better chance going with someone local who I kind of knew in terms of getting accepted and going.
Yeah,
But who knows? You know,
yeah.
maybe if I'd gone somewhere else, I also would have loved it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that's such a good point too, because as we always talk about, the San Francisco Bay Area is the second largest publishing hub in America, in the USA. And so, you know, with those of you who are based there, those of us who are typically based there, and we're really lucky to have access to amazing book festivals, publishers, editors who are actually probably within a 15-20 mile radius of you if you live in the Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco area. Like Chronicle is right there in your backyard, and they are an amazing children's book publisher if you're working on a picture book or something like that. And so, yeah, those local options are definitely something to explore because you have a geographical advantage of being able to maybe pop up at a mixer or reach out to someone and maybe have a mutual contact, you know, on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is probably one of the most overlooked ways to connect with people inside of publishing houses. You can literally search Chronicle Books, the company, look for people who work there, and then see what they do at that company. And you can reach out. I mean, I've been able to get in touch with some people who are really hard to get in touch with just by hitting them up on LinkedIn, because it's not a traditional way that many people contact editors and look to engage a dialogue. And so
that's awesome. Also, I should say, just because I was talking to my publisher the other day and he mentioned that he goes to, you know, he sells books at like comic art festivals all over North America. And he was like, oh, you know, I meet a lot of people who I want to publish at those festivals. They're just there selling zines and selling their own books. And he just walks around and anyone he thinks has promise or looks good, he buys their zine and he'll be like, maybe I'll publish them, you know? So it could be worthwhile checking that type of thing out too. I mean, this is, maybe not everybody here is a graphic novelist, but I'm sure there's also literary festivals where you could meet publishers too. Small publishers anyway.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice. Way wants to know, did you target a specific age group for LANGOSH and PEPPI?
So I didn't necessarily target an age group specifically, but I knew that the subject matter that I was going to deal with might not be appropriate for all ages. So I did talk to Andy about that. I mean, there's swear words in it. There's some nudity. There's some disturbing imagery, maybe just emotionally hard. So all that being said, I knew that it was probably going to be more people who are, you know, young adults who would be interested in it. Yeah,
no, that makes sense. And Helen wants to know, and I know you touched upon this before, but if you can just give us a brief overview once again, how did you structure your time in terms of creating?
Yeah, so structure was really important for me. I loved being unstructured, and like that was a good time for me to get ideas and inspiration. But when I wanted to actually finish the project, I had to structure my time. Like I said before, I also have another business. I'm self-employed, like woodworking teacher and furniture maker. So I had that as kind of a already existing schedule. I had my classes to teach and I had my projects that I wanted to make. So I needed to schedule those things. And so I just forced myself to be like, the best time for me to draw is in the morning because my classes are on the evening and weekends. So I'm like, every morning, I'm gonna work on this book, you know, like even if I sit down and I can't do anything because I am not feeling it at all, I'm gonna try to do it every day in the morning. And that really helped me. Yeah,
and I feel like that also taps on to what Marlon was asking in terms of how do you balance your time between your work and your book, which is something, you know, I just want to know.
Yeah, it's really important to try to find schedule some time to just relax as well. And like that's become more and more important to me as I've gone through the process, making sure that I had at least one day a week where I wasn't doing any comic book stuff or any woodworking stuff. That was just a day just for me. And that was so important for me to just recharge my batteries. And so, you know, give yourself that break if you can. Yeah.
Teresa wants to know, did you edit along the way or did you just flow through the story and then maybe come back and edit at the end, or were you editing as you were creating?
That's a really interesting question because I think I did a little bit of both. I really did free flow a lot of it. I'd done quite a bit of thinking before I actually started drawing what it was I wanted, how I wanted the story arc to go. As I was drawing and looking through my journals and remembering events of the past, I would sometimes realize, oh, I need to devote more time to this particular part of the story and maybe less time to another part. It meant that I had to sort of pre-edit myself, like be like, okay, I thought I was gonna devote 20 pages to this one thing, but actually that thing isn't as important as it seemed like it was before. So now I'm going to devote more time to what I'm working on right now. And then after I finished after I finished most of it, I actually edited out probably 70 pages
Oh,
of
wow.
stuff. Yeah. And then
Oh,
I did a lot of reworking on certain areas too, especially stuff that I had done in the early days. It seemed not quite in harmony with what I had been doing in the end of the book. So it wasn't what's the word? It wasn't exactly the same style. So I went back to the beginning and I reworked some of the stuff from the beginning as well. Yeah. Yeah.
wow. Wow. That was a lot of edits. It's just,
It's
since
a
graphic
lot.
novels is, it's such a space that's so amazing and awesome, but also, as we talked about personally, it's one of those gaps in the medium that I haven't had a lot of experience with. I've done a lot of picture books and done chapter books, but that graphic novel space is so incredible. And just to hear that amount of editing was a part of your process
Yeah, it was a lot.
is, yeah, it was a lot. Yeah.
Because I love drawing. So it was like, if I had been the kind of person who wrote everything down and did the editing and the writing process and
Mhm.
then drew it, I might have had less pages of drawings to edit out. But I draw inspiration from the actual illustration part. So that's what I wanted to do. So I spent a lot of time illustrating pages that I later was like, I don't actually need these. But it was good to do it because I got way better at drawing. So I don't
Exactly.
know. It was a bit of a balance there, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. And so, two questions from Teresa. The 15K budget that you applied for, that was to back you personally while you created the story, right?
Sorry, I got distracted because someone just texted me. What did you say?
Oh, that's okay. The $15,000 that you applied for via the grant, that was just to back you as an artist throughout the creation of the project, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, reading, the grant application guidelines.
Hmm.
For this particular grant, they do allow you to spend the money on living expenses.
Hmm.
So it's basically to sustain you as you do a project. There's certain budgetary restrictions, like I'm not supposed to buy any equipment that I am going to keep after. So I couldn't buy
Mm.
myself a new drafting table with it, for example.
Mm.
But it's basically like $2,000 a month to help me live.
Right.
I can buy food with it. I can buy anything that any kind of material good that I'm going to use up, like paper, ink, rent, things like that. I can spend the money on. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there are some parameters around that. Okay. Wow. That was a really good question. Um, Two questions. What's your storyboarding process like? And do you draw physically on paper and pencil? Or do you use the computer or a stylus on an iPad?
Mm.
Where do you prefer to do most of your drawing?
Yeah, so my storyboarding is very bare bones. It's super sketched. I use a sketchbook and a pencil.
Okay.
I just sit down and I basically draw like a tic-tac-toe board on a piece of paper, and I stick figures, because I know in my head how I want it to look. I just need the flow and the pacing to be figured out in the storyboarding. So I use the storyboarding for that. Like, I can fill up, I don't need to put a lot of detail into it personally. I'll put the detail into the drawings later once I have that sort of pacing figured out. And that took quite a long time to get, because I think this is something, Jesse, that we talked about in our last conversation, where it's like the average person, reader of comic books, spends less than 10 seconds per page looking at the page. So what's a very slow process for the illustrator is a very fast process for the reader, because they're just going to whiz through that book, and it could take you an entire day to draw one page, and they're going to look at it for 9 seconds. So you have to give yourself a lot of space. You can put lots and lots of panels where you feel like almost nothing is happening, but for the reader it's like an entry into the pacing of your world. So that also is what I storyboard to figure out. So can storyboard it, put it away for a week, and then look at it again. And does it feel too fast? Does it feel too slow? that's what I use it for. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That's really insightful. What kind of pens, even wants to know what kind of pens or markers do you use? And do you use the pencil first and then the pen? Is that usually how it works?
I use a mechanical pencil, and I use like a drafting table. I tape my page onto the table, and I use a ruler and a square to align all of the panels. And I don't use the same size panels for every page. So every page is different, is a different layout. Then I'll do a pencil drawing, complete the whole page, and then I put that onto a light table and I trace it using a fountain pen and ink, like dip the pen in the ink, and I use that to go over all of the pencil on the light table, because I don't want to erase a bunch of pencil lines. And then I use a marker, just one shade of gray. There's this one shade of gray that I like, and it's very light gray. And then I use that almost like a watercolor wash. And so I can go over it several times and it deepens the gray where I want it to be darker. But the nice thing about markers, as opposed to actual watercolors, is that the markers don't wrinkle the page at all. Because the marker is made with acetone or whatever, it evaporates super quickly. So the page stays perfectly flat, which makes it a lot easier for me to scan my drawings later without any weird shadows showing up. Yeah. Wow.
That is fascinating. And even more fascinating.
I'm getting so detailed.
No, that's great. That's great, because I know all of the illustrators and aspiring illustrators and cartoonists are following you perfectly. Me as an author who has no drawing talent whatsoever, I'm just awed by all of the detail. I'm always awed by the illustrator cartoonist process. And last but not least, Teresa, for this last question, if you're here, I'm going to go ahead and you can go ahead and unmute yourself, because I know you have quite a few points in that question. I just want to make sure that you're getting them, you're asking what you care about. So go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a bit overzealous because I'm super excited right now. And this is probably the most informative conversation I've been a part of. So thank you so very much. So for me, I'm basically going to position myself like Jesse. Like, I feel more comfortable writing, but I lead with the visual before I can write the chapter. So the novel that I'm gearing up to create, I'm expecting 30% of it to be graphic novel, meaning you will be able to see the evolution of this character, which is based on motherhood and mental health. I want the readers to be able to see the evolution of her per chapter. So for an example, it would be a leading image and then maybe 20 to 15 or 20 pages to follow. So my main question is, what's the pricing? How do I price an illustrator out? What's that vetting process like? Because it just feels really unfamiliar to me. And I do have the leading image. I did find someone to draft it, but I'm not confident, and I do think I need to vet another illustrator to carry the rest of the images out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of vetting an illustrator, all I can say is the illustrations have to speak to you personally on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't feel that the illustrations are doing it for you,
Mm-hmm.
keep looking until you find someone who you connect with. Because there's a lot of illustrators out there, different styles. But in terms of pricing, I mean, that can vary depending on, how long the person's been in the game. So for myself, I recently did some pages for an anthology of books, or an anthology of stories. They were all based on kind of, Nova Scotian artists, right? And we were paid $200 a page
Mm-hmm.
for that. And that's regardless of, how many hours the person puts into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably a good, between $200 and $300 per page is probably a good general amount, I would say, that you could budget for an illustrator. Of course, it depends, right? Like how much you want them to do. If it's like an entire book, I'm never going to get paid. Doesn't matter how many copies of Langosh and Peppi get sold, I am never going to make $300 a page on that book. But if you want someone to do, like you said, like it's almost like, from what I understand, I might be wrong, but it's almost like a chapter heading. So
correct.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's like that, I would probably budget between $200 and $300 per page. Now you can negotiate with the illustrator as well. You know, ask them what their rate is. You might get different responses from different people. But yeah.
So the last question that I'll ask, thank you for clarifying, because that's monumental for me. The last question that I have is, in sharing my idea about the book, is this something, like, how do I communicate legally? Like, do I need to copyright the draft idea, or like, are there non-disclosure forms that I need to send out as I am vetting illustrators? Or, you know, what was that process like for you when you were hired?
Are you sharing excerpts from your book with illustrators? Are they reading your actual content, or are you just giving them a general kind of idea what your book is about?
The last two, I've actually shared bits and pieces of both. Luckily, I have an entire film. So the film is the easiest way for me to show them the evolution of the character. But my film, it will be done in October. So it's not available to show in its entirety. So I have been, you know, sharing bits and pieces of the chapters, just like the rough draft. So should I, even in doing that, even if it's not completely, I mean, I haven't copywritten some of the content, but should I be sending off like a non-disclosure agreement, or is there any like documentation that you recommend?
Well, unfortunately, there's nothing that I could recommend. Probably the laws on that are a little bit different in Canada. I'm going to speak from a totally just personal standpoint on that, which is that I totally see where you're coming from. But your book, it sounds like, is going to really come from a personal place, and it's going to be your voice speaking on that, which is probably why you're concerned about, you know, somebody misappropriating it. But I think I wouldn't personally be too concerned about sending out small excerpts, or like a general idea of your book to people. Because you're looking for professional illustrators, right? It's not going out to just anybody. It's going out to people who also are professional, and they will be working, you know, they'll have certain professional standards, I would think. So yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, no one's going to be able to take your voice from you and write your book for you and steal your idea. I don't think. I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all.
Nice.
I encourage you so much in what you're doing. It's a really important subject, and, you know, I think it's awesome. So
any illustrators on the call, or if there's you know, a network that, you know, that I can tap into, I would absolutely love to meet with people. Actually, Kaiser Permanente is going to be one of the largest sponsors for the film. So I'm gearing up to, the financing is going to be available, and this is all very, very intimidating for me. But the reason I decided to do the book is because it's like, I already have the voice to it through the film. And I want to make sure that I have something else available where people can get the fine details of the story. So if you recommend, you know, a network that I can vet for illustrators, I would be extremely grateful for that, which, you know, may come in the form of an email as a follow-up to this conversation. But I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. That sounds awesome. I'm so excited to see the film and see the book come to life, Teresa. That's amazing. Congrats.
Thanks, Jesse.
Of course. And thank you, Veronica. Definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time. We can't, you know, we appreciate you so much. For everybody who joined, we usually like to try to give a little honorarium to our guests. I just dropped into the chat where you guys can go ahead and Venmo or Square or PayPal the donation if you can. Obviously, don't feel obligated. And then I'll add mine to that. We'll go ahead and send it on over to Veronica for offering her time and energy and expertise, because I'm telling you, in my experience, having somebody talk you through what they've been through and how they get through creatively is so valuable. It's something you can't just search online. It's something you can't just find, you know, necessarily on a YouTube clip. It's once you get your questions answered about what matters to you to help you along your process. And so you taking this time, Veronica, is just tremendous. And it helps us a lot as creatives to frame our experience and maybe think about just different ways to navigate the space. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been totally wonderful. It's so nice to talk to you, and I appreciate all of the very thoughtful questions.
Of course. So where can people get your work, follow your work?
Oh, yeah, okay. So yeah, if you go to CONUNDRUMPRESS.com, you can find the book there. Even if you just Google my name, it'll come up anyway. So you can get it on Amazon, you can order it, but I would suggest ordering it directly from Conundrum Press or your local bookstore or comic book store. You know, support your local businesses and not Amazon if you can afford it.
Nice. Well, that is great. I've already started cracking into my copy of Language Peppy. I'm excited to keep it going. It's been great. So I'm excited to keep reading. And if you guys have any questions, as always, you know, feel free to email me and reach out. And yeah, we'll try to get those answered. Our very next session is next Saturday coming up. We are speaking to Selena James. She was an editor at a major New York publishing house for quite some time. And she's going to talk us through her experiences as an in-house editor, some of the vetting processes, you know, how they look at manuscripts. So we're going to get a peek behind the curtain and see how that world works too from the in-house editor standpoint. So hopefully that'll be insightful. Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome.
Of course. So thank you guys so much. You guys have a great rest of your Saturday. This has been amazing. Thank you for your questions and your patience and your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Veronica. Super appreciate it.
That was terrific.
Thank you. Thank you so much.